Christian greetings, everyone, in these last days of life on earth. Headline: Victims angered and upset by ruling freeing molesters. July 12th, New York Times, Los Angeles. George Neville Rucker, an 82-year-old former Roman Catholic priest, was on a 2-month cruise of the Aleutian Islands in Alaska when the authorities said his past finally caught up with him. Alaska state troopers arrested him, harnessed him on a tugboat, and returned him to Los Angeles, where he faced charges of molesting 12 girls over 30 years, starting a year after he was ordained as a priest in 1946. If convicted, he faced a possible prison sentence of 26 years. But this week, before any evidence was presented to a jury, Mr. Rucker walked out of court a free man. He is among perhaps hundreds of people in California who are being freed from trial or jail as a result of a United States Supreme Court ruling on June 26 overturning a 1993 California law that allowed charges against child molesters protected by a previous deadline on prosecutions. State officials said the decision affected as many as 800 people accused of sexual offenses or already convicted. The ruling and release of the offenders has infuriated victims and frustrated prosecutors. "We're still licking our wounds here," said William Hodgman, head of the Sexual Crimes Unit of the Los Angeles County District Attorney's Office. "Conservatively, we have over 200 impacted cases in L.A. County alone, with the prospect of it going higher." He added, "Without question, there will be established child molesters free from custody and allowed to go back into the communities from whence they came." Let's stop here for a moment. Can anyone with an ounce of sense see what is transpiring here? Absolutely every person in the United States of America that has access to a television, a radio, the internet, or even a newspaper knows that the Roman Catholic Church is the sole beneficiary of such a horrendous law as this. Only Rome will benefit by this. Sure, some pedophiles that are not Catholic priests will be released from prison, and we can solely thank Rome for that. But it's truly Rome that will be blessed by this. Literally thousands of lawsuits across this nation prove that beyond a doubt. Now, I know I've stated this before, but something this decadent bears repeating. The prophesied unjust laws are being passed that first and foremost benefit Antichrist and his priests. Many of us knew this day was coming when we saw how the Supreme Court placed a gag order on the media regarding the massive number of lawsuits being filed against the Vatican. They were protecting Rome then, and they are protecting Rome now. Had the media been allowed to report on the thousands of lawsuits, the Roman Catholic Church would have literally collapsed into a pile of rubble due to all the millions of Catholics finally leaving this church. Sure, many have already left, but can you imagine how many more would have left had they known just how bad this situation is? I have literally hundreds of articles on my RCC and sex page on the website, plus I have hundreds more yet to be posted. There would have been thousands more had the media been allowed to report on it. But the U.S. government, the lamb-horned beast, needs the beast in Rome. Prophecy declares these two will play a large role in enforcing the mark of the Roman beast. If the home of the beast were to collapse prematurely, then Satan's plans fail. Still, regardless of the fact that the government-controlled media clammed up on these facts, the truth is there truly are thousands of priests in jail, or about to be in jail. Satan knows this, so his man in Rome has to get busy spin-doctoring not only the media, he has to schmooze the lawmakers as well. And seeing how the majority of the Congress is sympathetic to the Vatican, and the majority of the Senate is as well, it should be a snap to convince the majority of Catholic sympathizers in the Supreme Court to follow Rome's lead. The article continues to say, among those the decision frees, prosecutors said, are Roman Catholic priests accused in some of the most notorious molestation cases in California. In addition to Mr. Rucker, prosecutors dropped charges this week against 2 other former priests. The decision applies to all molesters recently charged in crimes that occurred before 1988 or recently convicted in such crimes. Among them is John Anthony Salazar, a former priest charged with molesting a student at a rectory at a Catholic high school and an altar boy at a church in Los Angeles in the early 1980s. "It devastated me and my family," said Carlos Perez Carrillo, who said Mr. Salazar molested him repeatedly at St. Bernard High School in Playa del Rey 20 years ago. You wait for justice for 20 years, and then it's taken away overnight. In a 5-4 decision, the Supreme Court ruled that the 1993 California law, effective in 1994, extended the deadline for prosecuting sexual crimes violated the Constitution's prohibition on laws that make an action illegal after the fact. Until 1994, child molesters could not be prosecuted in California more than 6 years after the offense. The new law extended the time in which prosecutions were allowed and authorized prosecutions that the old law's deadline had barred. Under the new law, an adult could provide evidence of sexual molestation before age 18, regardless of when it occurred, and prosecutors had a year to bring charges. Fact is, people, the reason the law was changed back then was to accommodate even then the massive amount of people stepping forward declaring the priests of Rome pedophiles. How many 11 or 12-year-olds do you know that are considered to be credible witnesses? The courts knew that back then as always. Most prosecuting attorneys know that defending attorneys would have an easy time of it if they saw a 12-year-old boy sitting in the witness stand. So the law bumped up the age. Problem is, too many credible adults came forward. And thanks to the truth coming to a flood in Boston not too long ago, many others decided to get on the bandwagon because of how easy it was being made known. It was no longer embarrassing for many, mainly because of two things. There is strength in numbers, and the church has gobs of money to shell out. However, now, thanks to the new laws in Texas and California, that day is coming to an end. Mark my words, what they're doing in these two states is merely a testing ground. Watch how the American people start to forget, as usual, and then watch how these laws start to pop up in other states. And rest assured, Rome will benefit greatly in all this. You don't need to be a rocket scientist to see this truth. Again, yes, there are some pedophiles that are going to be let out of jail that are not Catholic priests. That is inevitable if this is going to work for Rome. Keep in mind, however, these pedophiles are not part of a multi-billion-dollar entity like the Vatican. No one pedophile is going to cause a landslide of multi-million-dollar lawsuits like the thousands of Roman Catholic priests can. That, in a nutshell, is why we see these unjust laws targeting our children being passed. The article goes on to say, the Supreme Court's ruling said the Constitution's ban on retroactive laws prohibited prosecution for offenses that had been previously barred by the passage of time. The ruling took effect immediately, and several people accused of sexual offenses were released the next day. Trials were stopped, people were released from prisons, investigations were closed. Bill Lockyer, the California Attorney General, said in an interview his office is compiling records of cases affected by the decision, and he estimated that 500 to 800 prosecutions would be dropped. Keep in mind, people, that's just one state. Let's play the averages on the low end here. Let's assume for a moment that each state has only 500 pedophiles in them. Oh, and by the way, California is only projecting these estimates on the data in 2 counties. But for the sake of argument, let's just still say that there's only 500 child molesters going to be released in each state, thanks to the Roman Catholic Church. That means the Roman Church has blessed a bare minimum of 25,000 child rapists with freedom. Not only that, they don't have to report to local authorities anymore either. They are literally free to live right next door to you and me. Getting back, the court has the last and final word on these matters, and I respect their sensitivity to the constitutional provision, Mr. Lockyer said. But I think they're wrong. These crimes were committed. They're awful crimes, and turning these people loose creates risks for all children in this state. The ruling allows charges for the molestation after 1988 because only the retroactive extension of the deadline for prosecution was overturned, he said. On Monday, charges were dropped against Mr. Rucker, who was accused of sexually assaulting 12 girls from 1947 to 1977, and the youngest victim was 7 years old, prosecutors said. After his arrest on the cruise ship, Mr. Rucker was freed on bail and was to have been tried later this year. He has been living in a Los Angeles home for retired priests. Mr. Rucker's lawyer, Donald Steyer, said the California law was defective and he would have challenged it at trial. Prosecutors cannot conceal their dismay at the effect of the decision. I am frustrated and disappointed, said Roseanne Froberg, chief of sex crimes prosecution in the Orange County District Attorney's Office. I have gone through a series of emotions, not dissimilar to a divorce. Ms. Froberg said this week that she had identified 8 cases that had been dismissed, or would be, and 3 sexual offenders who would be released from prison. 3 of her cases involved clergy. The worst part, she said, has been breaking the news to victims and victim advocates. I have to let them know that these people will be getting out of custody without any provision for probation, parole, or protective order, she said. Those affected by the decision will not have to comply with the state's law that requires sexual offenders to register with the authorities and notify the communities in which they intend to live. Catherine Freeberg, a lawyer in Irvine, California, who represents several people who say they were abused by priests, said the ruling would affect not only the estimated 800 child molesters in California justice system, but also many others. Potentially thousands and thousands of other pedophiles will get away with their crimes because of other state legislatures which will be reluctant to pass new laws, Ms. Freeberg said. Lawmakers in New York, Massachusetts, Illinois, and Florida had been considering extending the statute of limitations for sexual crimes against children, but would now be unlikely to try. Mr. Perez Carrillo, who is 37, said that his molestation by Mr. Salazar had undermined his relationship with the church, which he said had been the center of his life when he was growing up in San Fernando Valley. Now he said he was equally disillusioned with the state. The implications of what happened at the Supreme Court, that 800 possible child molesters and rapists are going to be set free, is just overwhelming, said Mr. Perez Carrillo, a supervising social worker in Los Angeles. The Supreme Court needed to look at the protection of children, and they didn't. This is just a devastating blow for children. It's time for the people trapped in Rome and other churches that walk with her to realize that enough is enough. Now, I'm not saying we can stop what the prophecy said is going to occur anyway. Not at all. What I am saying is we need to be more adamant in our approach to those who are now defined as pedophile defenders. We need to convince the Catholic people that this is now how the world defines Roman Catholicism. It's a literal joke now in most circles. They cannot claim they are being persecuted because they are in fact the ones persecuting the children by defending their church leaders the right to do so. I know it seems strange to have to try and convince people of this. One would think common sense would play a large role in this, but we are dealing with the prophesied beast here. The word doesn't kid around when it says all the world wonders after this beast. In fact, people are literally and scientifically showing signs of brainwashing in this church. Using common sense and the tools available to all of us now, thanks to the internet, one can see this. How else do you explain people staying in a church that has openly admitted to killing over 150 million Christians on March 12th, year 2000? How else do you explain people staying in a church that has openly admitted to molesting their own children for decades? And how else do you explain people staying in a church that their very own Bibles literally define as pagan? We need to be wise as serpents and harmless as doves when approaching Catholics now more than ever. They need to be made known of these facts. But we must be Christ-like in our approach. Yes, they are looked upon as paganistic, child-molesting murderers by the world now, thanks to their church leaders. But we need to share Jesus with them in a way that opens their eyes to just how evil their church leaders really are. Even the devout Catholic that boldly states, I love Jesus and I don't agree with what my priests are doing, no longer has that as an excuse. If he really does love Jesus, they would do as Jesus says to do in Revelation 18:4. Come out of her, my people, that ye be not partakers of her sins, and that you receive not of her plagues. This is Nicholas from Presence of God Ministries saying, until next time, I pray the Lord blesses you and yours with the desire to be the Christian he created you to be. Thank you for listening, and remember, the truth is provided in the Word of God.